They say he died in fire. But some nights when the wind moves through the cane fields of Haiti, you can still hear him whisper, "The chains will break. The poison will flow." The French called him a monster. The slaves called him a god. His name was Makandal, the man who used poison and sorcery to terrify an empire. The screen fades into the dark Caribbean night, a blood-red moon hanging over the endless sea of sugarcane. Crickets scream, and in the distance someone is running. A whip cracks, a shadow moves, and vanishes. The night of chains. The night was thick with the smell of sugar and sweat. The moon hung heavy over Saint-Domingue, the richest colony in the Caribbean, and the cruelest. French overseers patrolled the cane fields with torches, their boots crushing the dry soil. Behind them, hundreds of enslaved Africans worked until their backs bled, cutting cane under the weight of lashes and hunger. Then, from deep in the fields, came a whisper, a sound not of pain, but of promise. A voice that said softly, "The spirits are awake." That was the first time they spoke of Makandal, the man who would not die before he became a legend. Makandal was just another slave. He was captured in Guinea, chained with hundreds of others, and thrown into the belly of a ship. The journey across the Atlantic stole his freedom, but not his mind. Unlike most, Makandal remembered every star, every wind, every god of his homeland. When he arrived in Saint-Domingue, the French branded his flesh with iron. He was forced to work the sugar mills, massive, deadly machines that ate men alive. One day his arm got caught in the gears. The overseer didn't stop the machine. By the time they pulled him free, his arm was crushed to pulp. They left him to die, but he didn't. He cut away the infection himself and lived. When he returned, missing one arm, he said softly, "The spirits carried me back. Death refused me." And from that day, Makandal was no longer just a man. He was the whisper of something ancient, something dangerous. A world built on blood. Saint-Domingue was paradise built on bones. The French masters lived in white mansions surrounded by gardens. Their slaves slept in mud huts, beaten for the smallest mistake. By day, the island glittered. By night, it screamed. Men were whipped for dropping a cane stalk. Women were branded for trying to escape. Children were born only to be sold. But among the enslaved, stories began to spread. Stories of a one-armed man who walked in shadows, who spoke to snakes, who could talk to spirits. They said he was chosen by LWA, the old African gods, to bring balance to a world gone mad. The poisoner's path Makandal vanished from the plantation one night. For months no one saw him. Then as deaths began, first it was a horse, then a French overseer, found with foam on his lips, his eyes rolled white, his tongue black. The doctors called it fever. The slaves whispered another word, Makandal. He had learned the secrets of the island, herbs that burned, roots that killed, powders that made the heart stop cold. They said he could poison a well with a single leaf, that he could curse a man by whispering his name into the wind. But Makandal didn't kill for vengeance alone. He was building something, a network, a silent army. Slaves on different plantations began mixing his powders into their master's food, their animals' feed, their water barrels. Every death was a message. We are not powerless. The Shadow Empire, by 1757, Makandal had become a ghost in the French imagination. They said he could turn into a dog, a fly, even a bird, that he could vanish into the earth itself. Entire plantations lived in terror. The French priests called it witchcraft. The slaves called it justice. They met in the forests at night, drums beating, firelight dancing across faces. Makandal stood before them, his stump raised high. "We were stolen," he said. "They think they own our bodies, but they will never own our souls. The spirits of Africa walk with us. The poison is our weapon. The island will burn." The crowd roared his name. That night, the revolution of fear began. The betrayal, but every legend has a traitor. A frightened slave caught stealing food begged the French for mercy. He told them of a meeting, deep in the forest near the old river shrine where Makandal would be gathering his followers. The French moved in silence. Dozens of soldiers surrounded the clearing. Makandal was standing by a fire, drawing symbols in the dirt with ash and blood. He looked up, calm, almost smiling. "You cannot catch what does not belong to this world." Gunfire shattered the night. Smoke filled the air. When it cleared, Makandal was gone. For 3 days they hunted him. Finally, they found him hiding in a cave, starved, weak, but still smiling, the execution of a legend. The French wanted to end the myth forever. They chained him, dragged him to the public square, and declared him a sorcerer, heretic, and murderer. Thousands of slaves were forced to watch as they tied him to the stake. The priest read his sentence. Makandal's voice rose above it all. "You will see, this fire cannot kill me. I will return in every breath of the wind, in every drop of blood that falls on this land." The flames roared. The crowd screamed, and then the rope around his neck snapped. Makandal fell into the fire. For a moment he was gone. Then, the fire flared brighter than before, and a shape rose from it. Some said it was a bird, others said it was a shadow. The French said he burned to ashes. But among the slaves they whispered, "Makandal did not die." They said his spirit slipped into the earth, into the trees, into the veins of the island itself, and that one day he would rise again, not as a man, but as a storm. They thought the fire had devoured him, but the fire only freed him. The French saw ashes, the slaves saw a sign, because that night Makandal didn't die. He multiplied. The scene opens on the burning square of Saint-Domingue. The flames fade into smoke, drifting over the sugar fields. The crowd of slaves stands silent, and in the smoke a shape rises like a face forming from ashes, then dissolving into the wind. The silence after the fire. When the fire died, nothing but the smell of burnt rope and fear remained. The French soldiers laughed and spat into the ashes. "The devil is gone," one said. But the slaves didn't move. They stood there, heads bowed, eyes wide, because in that moment they swore they saw something impossible, a flicker of movement inside the smoke. That night the winds blew strangely over the island. Dogs howled. Candles burned blue, and across the plantations one name whispered through the cane, Makandal, the ghost that spoke in dreams. In the following weeks, slaves began to dream. Men woke screaming, saying Makandal stood at the foot of their beds, his one arm raised, his eyes burning like coals. "Don't fear death," he said in their dreams. "Fear silence, because silence is slavery." Women claimed they saw him in the rivers, his reflection staring back from the water, whispering secrets of herbs and roots. Children said snakes came to their huts at night, curling up near their heads and whispering his name in the dark. The French dismissed it as superstition, but crops began to wither, animals fell ill, and one by one, the French masters who had attended Makandal's execution started dying mysteriously. The first was found with his tongue swollen, his eyes black. The second fell from his horse, no wound, no mark, just dead. The third woke screaming that something was choking him, though no one else was there. Each death left the same question hanging in the air. Can a dead man take revenge? The hidden rebellion Makandal's followers began to gather again, not in open forests now, but in secret caves, swamps, and graveyards. They carried bits of his ashes in small gourds around their necks, believing it kept his spirit close. His most loyal disciple, a woman named Aida, became the voice of his ghost. She claimed Makandal spoke through her, that he had crossed the boundary between worlds. Through her the message spread, "The fire freed me. Now I walk through every one of you. The poison flows in your veins, and when the time comes, you will rise." The gatherings became more than worship. They became planning grounds, hidden beneath songs and drums. Messages passed, which plantations to strike, which overseers to poison, where to hide the herbs. The French thought the island had grown quiet again. They didn't know the silence was only the sound of the storm gathering. The fear returns by 1758. Fear had returned stronger than ever. Every time an overseer died suddenly, every time a child fell ill, they blamed Makandal's curse. The French priests sprinkled holy water on the fields. They burned charms and fetishes. They hanged slaves at random to appease the devil. But the more they punished, the more the legend spread. Even new slaves arriving from Africa whispered his name before learning a single word of French. Makandal had become more than a ghost. He was a symbol, the spirit of vengeance itself. The fire in their hearts years passed, but the memory didn't fade. Every generation of slaves learned his story, not from books, but from whispers, songs, and rituals. Mothers told their children, "The one-armed man who fought the whites, his fire burns inside us." By the late 1700s, those whispers became war cries. A new wave of rebellion was rising, one that would shake the entire world. Men like Dutty Boukman and Toussaint Louverture would later lead the Haitian Revolution. But long before them, Makandal's spirit had already prepared the island's soul. In secret Vodou ceremonies, the priests invoked his name before battle. They said, "Makandal opened the gate, now we walk through it." The French nightmare for the French, the colony that once made them the richest empire, had turned into a nightmare. Sugar exports fell, workers vanished, ships burned. Rumors said the very soil of Haiti was cursed, that the land itself had turned against them. One French officer wrote in his journal, "We killed the man, yet his shadow follows us. I hear his name in the wind. Every rustle of the cane sounds like his laughter." They tried to erase his memory, banning Vodou, forbidding African drums, killing priests. But the more they erased, the deeper his name carved itself into the hearts of the people. The serpent and the smoke decades later, when the first sparks of revolution finally erupted in 1791, the night sky over Haiti looked eerily familiar, dark, smoky, and filled with the sound of drums. At Bois Caïman, the legendary Vodou ceremony that started the rebellion, witnesses said a giant black snake appeared and circled the fire. Its eyes glowed red, its body moved like smoke, and when the priestess lifted her arms to the heavens, she shouted one word, "Makandal." The crowd erupted. They believed his spirit had returned to lead them once more. Not through poison this time, but through war, the fire that wouldn't die. And so, even though the man had burned to ashes decades earlier, the fire he lit had never truly gone out. It lived in the fear of the French. It lived in the courage of the slaves. It lived in the soil, the trees, the water, because Makandal's true power was never his poison. It was his belief. He made the enslaved believe that death was not the end, that even in chains, they could still command spirits, still fight, still burn back. And when Haiti finally rose against France and won, the people said softly, "The prophecy of Makandal has come true." The legend lives today, centuries later. When the wind moves through the cane fields of Haiti, people say you can still hear a faint whisper, a voice carried through time. The fire never dies. The chains never hold. I am Makandal. The poison, the spirit, the storm. The screen fades to black, the sound of drums echoing faintly as lightning cracks across the sky. He said the fire would return, and when it didn't come for one man. It came for an empire. The screen opens on the year 1791. Thunder rumbles over the Caribbean. Lightning flashes over the mountains of Saint-Domingue. And from the depths of the forest, hundreds of enslaved men and women march with torches, chanting one name, Makandal. Makandal. The island trembles. 3 decades had passed since Makandal burned. But in Saint-Domingue, his story had never turned to ash. It lived in every drumbeat, every whispered prayer, every wound that refused to heal. By the late 18th century, the island had changed, but not for the better. The French masters had grown even richer, their cruelty sharper, their greed endless. The slaves, now numbering in the hundreds of thousands, worked under an iron sun, sweat, blood, and silence holding the colony together. But the silence was breaking. Rumors spread of revolutions in faraway lands, America, France, liberty, equality. And among the slaves, an older message stirred beneath those new words. Not freedom from law, but freedom promised by prophecy. Makandal said the fire would return. The ceremony at Bois Caïman began on a stormy night, August 1791. The sky wept lightning. The earth shook with thunder, and the wind carried the scent of rum and gunpowder. Deep in the northern mountains, hundreds of slaves gathered in secret. They came from different plantations, speaking different tongues, but one name united them all, Makandal. At the center stood Dutty Boukman, a towering man with eyes like burning coals, and Cécile Fatimon, a Vodou priestess whose voice cut through the storm like a blade. They called upon the El Doué, the spirits of Africa, the same ones Makandal had once served. The drums pounded, The lightning flashed. A black pig was sacrificed, its blood soaking the earth. Cecile's voice rose above the wind. The God who created the sun, who brings justice and watches the deeds of men, commands us to take revenge. Throw away the image of the white man's God, for it thirsts for our tears. Listen instead to the spirits of our ancestors, to Makandal. The crowd erupted in screams of fury and faith. They tore their chains, smeared blood on their faces, and swore an oath: liberty or death. That night, the prophecy ignited. The first flames of revolution. Within days, the plantations burned. Fields of sugarcane turned into infernos. White mansions melted under fire and smoke. The French woke to find their paradise devouring itself. Slaves armed with machetes and torches stormed through the night, chanting songs of freedom and vengeance. The colonists called it madness. The slaves called it justice, and through the chaos, one phrase echoed over and over: "Makandal walks again." They said his spirit moved among them, unseen but felt, guiding hands, whispering courage, warning of ambushes. Some claimed to see a one-armed shadow standing in the flames, smiling as French blood soaked the soil. Others swore they saw snakes slithering unharmed through fire, the same sign that had once marked his presence. The slaves believed it fully. The fire that burned him now burns for us. The French fight back. The colonists were terrified beyond reason. They brought in soldiers from Europe, armed with guns and cannon, but no amount of iron could crush an idea that had already become immortal. The French tried to erase Makandal's name once again, burning Vodou temples, killing priests, outlawing African chants. But each time they silenced one, 10 more rose in their place. Even the French soldiers whispered at night, "When we march through the cane fields, something follows us." One officer recorded in his diary, "We fight not men but shadows. Their eyes glow like coals, their drums call the dead." The spirit in the fire amid the chaos, strange stories spread. Rebels claimed that when they were cornered, the wind would shift suddenly, blinding their enemies with dust. When they were starving, fruits would appear on trees that hadn't borne fruit in months. When they prayed for guidance, snakes would crawl into their camps, silent, glowing, watching. To them, it wasn't coincidence. It was Makandal. He was the storm, the wind, the whisper in the leaves. His magic had not died, it had evolved. Now he didn't need poison to kill. He used faith. He turned belief into a weapon sharper than any blade. The blood and the banner as the revolution spread. New leaders rose: Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe. Educated men, warriors, strategists, but each carried in their hearts the same fire. They spoke of liberty and equality, but in their private rituals they honored the old gods. Before battle they poured rum into the earth, whispering Makandal's name. "You lit the first flame, now guide our hands to finish what you began." And each time they won, they said it was his blessing that carried them. Each French defeat was seen not as victory by arms, but by spirit. The empire burns by 1803. The unthinkable happened. The greatest colonial power on earth, France, was defeated by its slaves. Napoleon's soldiers, who had conquered half of Europe, fell in the Caribbean heat. The sugar fields that once bled black labor now burned white with ash. On January 1st, 1804, Haiti declared independence, the first free black republic in the world. The land that had once been called the jewel of the French Empire was now its grave. And as the drums of celebration echoed through the night, someone whispered through the crowd, "Makandal's prophecy has come true." The prophecy of blood and freedom in Vodou temples across Haiti. The people lit candles for Makandal, not as a ghost, not as a saint, but as the father of their freedom. For them, he wasn't just a man who fought with poison. He was the first to tell them they could fight at all. "He taught us the meaning of fire," one priest said. "He showed us that the spirit can kill kings." And from that day on, whenever thunder rolled over Haiti, people smiled and said, "Makandal is laughing again." Trilogue, the immortal wind. Centuries later, the cane fields still whisper. Tourists walk through the ruins of old plantations, unaware that beneath their feet lie the ashes of both slaves and masters. And sometimes, when the night is still and the wind turns hot, Locals say they can hear the sound of drums, distant, faint. Impossible. A voice in the darkness murmurs, "You can burn my body, but you can never burn my fire." Because Makandal's story was never about poison, magic, or death. It was about belief, and the courage to turn belief into rebellion. And that, Jenny, is why even today the island still whispers his name, Makandal, the fire that freed a nation. They thought freedom ended the curse, but freedom doesn't erase blood, it remembers it. The sugar that made empires rich still whispers with the souls it devoured, and when the wind moves through the cane, it still carries his name, Makandal. The camera glides over vast empty plantations, ruined mills, rusted chains buried in the soil. A sugarcane stalk sways gently, and the wind sounds almost like a voice whispering through it. The price of freedom Haiti was free, but freedom came with ghosts. The revolution had burned the island clean of French rule, but not of its past. The fields still held bones, the rivers still ran red when it rained, and the sugar, that sweet white crystal that had once built the French Empire, now tasted bitter. Farmers said their crops wouldn't grow. Children fell sick from the cane. Every harvest brought strange accidents, blades snapping, carts overturning, fires starting with no spark. Old women in the mountains whispered the reason softly, afraid to say it too loud. The land remembers. The sugar is cursed. The return of the serpent one humid night. A storm rolled over the northern plains. Lightning flashed, and in that blinding light, a figure was seen standing among the cane, one-armed, wrapped in shadows, his eyes glowing faint green. The villagers said the wind hissed like a snake. Cattle broke their pens, dogs howled, and by morning the fields were black. Every stalk of sugarcane burned from the inside out, as if poisoned by the earth itself. No one dared to go near the ashes. Because every time the wind blew through them, it whispered, "I fed their greed. Now I feed their ghosts, the blood that never dried." The French may have left Haiti, but their ships still sailed from other colonies, Cuba, Martinique, Louisiana, still carrying sugar, still carrying pain. And wherever that white sugar traveled, the curse followed. In 1812, a French merchant ship, La Dame Blanche, left Havana loaded with sugar bound for Bordeaux. On the fifth night, the sea turned black. The crew woke to screams. The barrels of sugar were moving. Something inside them was alive. When the ship was found days later, it was empty. Only one word was carved into the captain's cabin wall, deep and jagged, as if written by a burned hand. Makandal. The French clergy called it blasphemy. But the sailors swore, "The ocean itself has turned against us." The man who wouldn't stay, dead legends began to spread across the Caribbean. In Cuba, they said a shadow walked through the plantations, cursing anyone who whipped a worker. In Martinique, a priest claimed his church bell rang by itself every night, until he found a small pouch of ashes hidden in its tower. In Louisiana, slaves whispered a prayer before cutting cane. "Makandal, leave my hands clean. Let me work for life, not for blood." Because now even those who never knew him, even those born generations later, felt the fear of his name. He had become more than memory. He had become justice eternal. The white gold turns red. The French Empire tried to rebuild its sugar business elsewhere, Jamaica, Trinidad, Guadeloupe. But disaster followed like a shadow. Fields caught fire for no reason. Diseases wiped out workers. Storms destroyed harvests year after year. A British colonel once wrote in his journal, "There is something unnatural about this land." The very wind smells of death and rum. The slaves speak of a man who still walks the night, a one-armed ghost who feeds the earth with vengeance. Even the colonists began to whisper his name before sleeping, not as defiance, but as plea. "Makandal, spare my fields." But the island winds never spared anyone who fed on cruelty. The curse spreads beyond the islands. By the 19th century, sugar had become the new gold of Europe, used in every home, every drink, every dessert. The sweet addiction that once enslaved millions now fed billions, and yet, in every place it grew, strange stories followed. In Brazil, a plantation overseer fell dead after tasting raw cane juice. His skin turned dark, his tongue black, just like those Frenchmen centuries before. In India, British officers dreamed of a man with burning eyes, In New Orleans, a sugar refinery exploded mysteriously. Workers swore they saw a face in the steam before the blast. And through it all, one pattern remained. The victims were always those who profited from pain. The people said it quietly. Makandal's curse does not end with death. It follows the sugar, wherever it goes. The shrine of ash and wind in the Haitian highlands, there stands a shrine made of black stone and bone. No one knows who built it. No one dares to clean it. Every year, when the winds change, the locals leave offerings there. Rum, herbs, a bit of raw sugar, and a drop of blood. The priest chants softly, "He freed our souls." Now he guards them, and as night falls, the wind grows warm, carrying the scent of burnt cane and rain. Sometimes those who stand too close swear they hear footsteps. Others say they feel a hand, light as smoke, touch their shoulder. When they turn, there's nothing. Only the whisper, "Do not forget." The curse. Never sleep. Centuries later, the world changed. Slavery ended. Plantations turned into tourist attractions, and sugar became cheap, ordinary, visible. But some things don't die with time. In 2010, a Haitian worker at a modern refinery reported seeing a one-armed man standing near the cane press at night. The next morning, the machine jammed, filled with ashes, though no fire had touched it. Even scientists couldn't explain it. But the old ones knew. They said the fire has only gone quiet. It breathes through the land, waiting. The final whisper, Makandal's curse, wasn't just vengeance. It was balance. It was the island's way of remembering. He wasn't punishing the living. He was reminding them of the dead. Because every grain of sugar carries a story. Every sweetness hides a scream. And every time someone tastes it without remembering the price, the wind grows a little colder. The old saying goes in Haiti, "When the cane bends too low, Makandal walks again." The camera fades on endless sugar fields under a blood-red sunset. A single stalk snaps and the wind whispers faintly, one last time, "The sweet shall never hide the bitter." Empires fall. Kings turn to dust. But curses, they have roots deeper than time. They grow in the soil, they live in the wind, and they remember every scream. Camera zooms out from Haiti. The land looks alive, like it's breathing. Volcanic heat pulses under its surface. Waves crash like thunder. A voice whispers through the storm, "Makandal is not gone. He became the island itself. The world that forgot centuries past. The world modernized. Machines replaced hands, progress replaced prayer. Nobody believed in curses anymore. But every sugar packet on every cafe table still carried the blood of the past. Only now it was wrapped in plastic instead of chains. And yet, strange signs began to appear again. Factories filled with the smell of burning cane, even when no fire had started. Rivers near plantations turned red for hours, then clear again as if nothing had happened. Birds stopped flying over old colonial estates. Scientists called it coincidence. The old priest called it awakening. The world forgot Makandal, one elder said. But he did not forget the world. The fire beneath the mountain deep. Beneath Haiti's mountains, something ancient stirred. Locals began to report tremors, not earthquakes, but pulses, like a heartbeat. The ground was alive. Volcanoes that had been dormant for centuries began to smoke again. At night, villagers said they saw shapes in the fire. A man's face, a serpent's coils, a burning arm raised toward the sky. Makandal walks the underworld now, they said. He feeds on the fire of the earth. And it was true, the island had become his body. Its rivers were his veins. Its winds were his breath. Its mountains his bones. He had not died. He had evolved. Echoes across the sea. The curse didn't stay on the island. Winds carried it, across oceans, across continents. In South America, sugar fields caught fire under a clear sky. In India, workers swore they saw black smoke forming human faces. In the Philippines, sugar warehouses filled with buzzing, flies that never died. It was as if the land itself was rejecting the crop, as if nature had finally learned Makandal's anger. And then the floods. Came hurricanes, droughts, entire plantations destroyed. Overnight, the earth was cleansing itself, burning away what was built on pain. The ghost in the machine in a modern sugar refinery, an automated one, filled with steel and steam. A worker in Brazil noticed something on the control screen. A figure, a human silhouette, one-armed flickering in the static of the camera feed. He laughed at first. Then the lights went out. When they came back, the message glowed across every monitor in red code. The sweet shall never hide the bitter. The factory shut down for days. Engineers found no error, no hack, no fault. Just one strange thing. The sugar that had been processed that night turned black, as if burned from inside. The prophecy of the winds in Port-au-Prince. An old Vodou priest named Maman Seraphine gathered her followers. Her voice trembled with fear and awe. The fire beneath the island breathes again. The curse is not vengeance, it is memory. Makandal was never a demon. He was the earth remembering pain. She raised her hands to the sky. The wind shifted, warm, alive, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. He will not destroy humanity, she whispered. He will teach it what it forgot. That night, thunder rolled over the ocean, and lightning struck the ruins of an old French fort. When dawn came, a new tree had grown in its center. Black bark, red leaves, shaped like a serpent. The locals called it Makandal's tree. They said whoever touched its leaves dreamed of the past, of chains, fire, and freedom. The curse becomes a prayer time passed again. But something had changed. People started to tell Makandal's story not as a tale of horror, but as a lesson. Artists painted his image, one arm raised, serpent at his side. Poets wrote about him as the spirit of rebellion. Children were named after him, and slowly, the curse turned into faith. Now when hurricanes passed, Haitians didn't curse his name. They prayed to him for strength. When the land trembled, they said, Makandal reminds us, the world still bleeds where injustice grows. The fire had become light. The curse had become conscience. Makandal's final vision legend says that on the night of the last great earthquake, a farmer saw him again, standing at the edge of a burning cane field. His face was calm now. His eyes no longer glowed with rage, but with peace. He looked at the sky and where the stars flickered like embers, and whispered, "The land is awake. My work is done." Then, with the sound of rustling leaves, his form dissolved into ash and light, carried away by the wind. The next morning, the field that had burned grew back greener than ever. And from that day, no one feared the name Makandal anymore. They honored it because his story wasn't about death. It was about rebirth, epilogue, the sweet that remembers today. When people pour sugar into their coffee, they don't think about where it came from. They don't hear the cries that built it, or the songs that survived it. But somewhere, in the hum of the earth, in the whisper of the wind, his name still moves. Makandal isn't just a man or a myth. He's the heartbeat of a land that refused to forget. He poisoned tyranny. He purified the soil. He became the breath of freedom itself. And so the legend ends, but the wind still carries his song. When the cane bends too low, when the earth begins to burn, remember, the fire is not your enemy. It's your history waking up.